Trump is taking right now is kind of Treasure Coast Solutions. Wednesdays between 9 and 10 o'clock, we talk about some issues that may affect you, some economic issues, some financial issues, and some of the things that are going on that may have an effect on your day-to-day lives. Some of the things that may be causing you some concern or aggravation, some things that may be questionable, or maybe not even seeing on the horizon, maybe not realizing some of the issues that may be out there and may eventually affect you in the short run or the long run. So my name is Mark Breckbell. I'm local CPA and ex-banker, licensed community association manager, and also have owned my own CPA firm for a number of years here in Stuart. So, which means that I don't really know anything. I've seen a lot of stuff though, So I'm here to just air some issues. So if you have something that you want to talk about, certainly we can. 220-9788, 220-WSTU. I would encourage you to try to keep it civil, but you can have an opposing view. We just won't put it on the air. No, you can have an opposing view. We don't care. Mike's not very quick, so don't say any dirty words because he can't cut you off real quick.
Correct. I'm moving slow.
That's moving slow. But otherwise, we welcome participation. And we try not to get it too political, but it is political. I mean, let's face it, economic decisions affect everybody. And when they affect you, you usually lash out. If they affect you positively, you react by reelecting the people that you think made a difference, even if they didn't. And if it affects you negatively, you lash out at the people and unelect the people who you think caused it, even though they may not have. So there's a lot of those types of things out there that are interrelated. And it's interesting. Financial issues can be turned into political issues. Financial issues can become political issues too. And financial reasons can be used to not do something that politically we may not want done. And I want to talk about a couple things and just kind of cause and effect. And today, like I said, a lot of this is just some general ramblings, but I do want to talk about some issues and some of the things that go on with them, and maybe a little bit, what you can see and what you can't see. So one of the big issues right now that we're hearing a lot about is tariffs, and it always gets me. I'm always interested in some of these issues where nobody ever has any interest in learning about any of these financial issues until all of a sudden they become these big problems, and then nobody really understands what they are. You could probably go ask most people, what's a tariff? And a lot of people can't tell you what that is. They don't even know what they think it's. Oh, it's a tax, or it's a fee, or it's a penalty. It's this or that. What is it? What is a tariff? Why do tariffs exist? Is it because you're trying to raise money? Is that what the purpose of a tariff is? Well, no. Tariffs are largely put in place by governments to protect various industries, or to have an impact on various trade policies. And so, I mean, I know this does sound like it gets kind of complicated, but here's what it boils down to. We have a worldwide economy. If China buys our products, then they owe us money. And so it's like we've extended them. I mean, they owe us money. And then they will pay us money. All right. So we have money coming from China, from their government to our government, basically to businesses within our country. Now, they're not going directly to the governments; they're going to those businesses. But it's from the consumers in one country, basically buying products in another country, and so when you look at that, you say, well, why would China want to buy the product? Well, they either can't get it, or they can't get it in the quantities they need, or they can't get it at the price that they need. All right. So, so that's why the consumers, they want blue jeans or whatever that happens to be. In the days when the Russian communist government fell, so to speak, it was blue jeans. But basically, they want something we've got. In the case of China, most of the time it's gas and oil. But basically, they want something, and they want to buy it from us. Now, the other side of that is our people in the United States have a bunch of stuff that they want to buy from businesses in China. And so a lot of times we buy those goods from China for two reasons. One is price. It's cheap. We don't care. And China's got a reputation of being cheap. Nobody likes Chinese products because they're cheap. But why do we buy them? Because they're cheap. That's why we buy them. So they're cheap. So we buy their product. All right. Also, it may be because we can get it, and we can't get it here in the United States. So even if we're willing to pay a little more, we can't even get it. For example, why do you think there was such a thing as Chinese drywall? Chinese drywall isn't a product. Chinese drywall is drywall that was bought from China. Why did we buy it? Well, in those days, if you remember, we had a whole bunch of damage and a whole bunch of problems. We had hurricanes. We couldn't get enough drywall. They didn't make enough drywall in the U.S. to fill the demand, and so we were buying from China. Now, why wasn't there enough product in the U.S.? Well, for one thing, because normally this was an emergency. Remember, we were buying a lot more drywall, like years worth of drywall in 1 year, versus months. So the drywall manufacturers, they were having a hard time in the U.S. Competing with the Chinese drywall manufacturers. So even in a good economy, people might have been buying products from China, drywall from China, because it was cheaper. So why is it cheaper? Well, you could say they're more efficient. They have cheaper labor, which is the answer, actually. You could say they're more efficient. They have better productivity, all of those kind of things. In general, when we're talking about China, it's cheaper because of labor. So you say, well, yeah, but see, they're an industrialized country. So their labor shouldn't be that much cheaper. And why is it cheaper? Because the government subsidizes directly certain industries. So here's why this tariff thing is so complicated. Let's say we put a tariff on Chinese drywall. And what that means is that we charge an additional tax. They're called tariffs, but it's really an additional tax on the sale of that product in the United States. So if you want to sell that product in the United States, you have to pay this tax to the United States government, basically. We collect this tariff. Now, why is that? Well, that may be because we're trying to protect our industry. So it may be because we want to support U.S. drywall makers, and we want them to make more money so that they can keep their businesses in the U.S. and be successful. Now, from a free trade standpoint, that's not a very good reason. And that's why people, especially free trade people and libertarians and conservatives, have a problem with tariffs. That's why this is a really weird issue, because you've got a Republican president who's pushing tariffs, but and there are many people who are just philosophically opposed from a free enterprise standpoint to tariffs. But again, this is where it's important to understand the differences, because the differences can be big here. So let's get back to my drywall story. So we put a tariff on that Chinese drywall so that product costs the same to sell in the United States as the U.S. drywall costs. Well, like I said, if that was to artificially prop up an industry that just isn't competitive, that's not something that we should do, I don't think. That's not something anybody can do. If, on the other hand, the competition has an unfair advantage. You've heard the concept, in fact, it was big in the Kennedy era, is a level playing field. Reagan talked about it, a level playing field. What do they mean by a level playing field? Well, what I'm getting at is China can produce that product cheaper because they subsidize the government itself. It's a communist government. Everybody works for the government. Nobody works for individual. I mean, they will all work for the government. You get what the government gives you. And the government determines what each job is worth from a pay standpoint. So if the government of China decides that manufacturing drywall, the workers that manufacture drywall should get $50 an hour, then they're going to get $50 an hour, and they're paid by the Chinese government. So basically, that person isn't going to be paid by the company. I mean, that's what that job is worth to that person if the communist government is paying for it. But the company doesn't have to pay $50 an hour. They're not paying that. They're just being provided with labor at whatever cost. They're being provided by labor, provided with labor by the Chinese government. So the Chinese government is determining what the price of drywall will be because the big component is labor, and they're determining the price of labor. So therefore, they are charging a tariff, in effect, a reverse tariff, because they're subsidizing the costs. And they're allowing the Chinese drywall maker to produce drywall cheaper than they could if they were forced to buy that labor at fair market value. Because if they had to pay $50 an hour for that labor, their price would be through the roof. All right? So what China can do is they can adjust their skilled workers. So let's say, for example, they want to dominate the drywall market. All they do is internally, they say, this job gets you this house and this car and this benefit, and it gets you this amount of food and this amount of clothing and this amount of this, all right? Which may be the equivalent of a job that if you were doing, the president of General Motors or something. I'm using that as a kind of far-fetched, but there's no correlation to what they're actually doing. It's what the government says they're going to subsidize that individual worker, what they're going to pay them, what the collective is going to redistribute the wealth to. That is the idea behind communism, is that you have everybody paying into a common pot and the government determining which jobs are worthy, which industries are worthy, which activity is worthy, and what you should do and don't do. If, for example, tomorrow the Chinese government determined that they did not want to produce drywall, that's not a good product. It's environmentally bad, and now the Chinese government cares about environment. So it's environmentally bad, they're no longer going to produce drywall. Then they're not going to have any workers that are going to get paid to produce drywall. So nobody's going to produce drywall. You can't build it if you don't have labor. And the Chinese government controls labor. The communist government controls labor. And that is why in subsidized economies, whether it's communist or socialist, there is a government subsidy that's built into every single product. Whether it's healthcare that's subsidized, think about this a minute. If I'm over in England, all right, and I've got a product that competes with a product in England, because again, we're not just talking about countries that we think that we're at war with or we have that are at conflict with. We're talking, so we're not just talking Russia, China, and North Korea and Iran. Yeah, those are countries that we have just general conflicts with, and we're at war with them. We're at real war with them, and we're at economic war with them, and we've been at economic war with them for years because we're using sanctions to try to level that playing field and get some change. But we're also at economic war with England, with Germany, with France, with Canada, with Mexico. We're at war with all of those from an economic standpoint. And don't be fooled. You can't, we are really there. That's what is going on. So when our friends overseas get upset with us because we're doing something that benefits us versus them, you have to constantly remember that they are not our allies in economic activities. They are our opponents. They are the people that we are competing against. They are the people that we are at economic war with. And if they can build their economy up and be able to provide more for their people than we can, that's what they're trying to do. If that causes us to have problems, if that causes our auto industry to go broke, if that causes us to have a depression, they don't care. They only care if our depression affects them. If our depression doesn't affect them, they could care. Just like we only care if their depression affects us. So you have to understand the concept of economic warfare. Now, George H.W. Bush, he understood that. Well, he didn't. Reagan did. He actually eliminated it. But back in that day, when Reagan had a group of people within the Defense Department whose sole job was to spy on our allies for economic purposes. That's what they did. They spied on technology and tried to steal it. So all this stuff about things going on with people interfering with this and interfering with that, and this has been going on for years. I mean, each country, they don't talk about it. It's not something, it's kind of like the CIA and we can't talk about that stuff. It's the same stuff. It's the same stuff as what's going on in the Defense Department when you call the Defense Department and say, are we going to war with North Korea? And if we do, how are we doing it? Well, they're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you any of that stuff. It's all classified. It's all top secret. Well, I can tell you that economic warfare against our allies is also top secret. They know we're waging that war. We know they're waging that war. If they can steal our technology, they will and they would. And they have been trying to do it for years. It's funny, years and years ago, there was this concept of the Star Wars system, which has been put into place now. It's under the Reagan administration, and it was given the name Star Wars because it was sarcastic. It was supposed to be a fiction. It was because that was when Star Wars was coming out. Nobody ever thought that was possible. So, it was labeled this by the media as fiction. Oh, Star Wars, that's the name they gave it because it was all in the future, fictional, not possible. Well, it was interesting. During the Reagan administration, the whole concept of a missile defense system, an interballistic missile system, was absolutely technologically possible. The problem was that the U.S. didn't have the engineering for the mirror capability that's necessary, and some of that type of electronic, some of that type of physical, mechanical type of technology. We didn't have that. The Russians did, but we didn't. On the other side of it, we had the software and the internal technology to make the stuff work. The guidance systems, the location systems, the firing systems. We had all of that. They didn't. Russia didn't. Russia was actively trying to steal that technology because if they could gain that technology, they would have won the Cold War in effect. We, on the other hand, were actively trying to steal that technology from Russia relative to mirrors. Now, were we trying to steal it from the Russian government? Yes, we were. But were we trying to steal it from companies within Russia? Absolutely. Because anybody that had that technology in Russia, we were trying to get it. Just like anybody that had the computer technology in the U.S. to do what they were trying to do, what Russia needed to do, they were trying to get it from them. So when economic war is waged, it is waged at the government level. Both countries are spying on each other and trying to steal each other's technology. But it is more directed than that. Economic warfare is directed specifically at companies and technologies within the U.S. It goes down to a much lower level. And that's why it is so important. And that's why the government makes an effort to try to control those technologies in the U.S. That's why there are certain types of technologies that aren't available for sale worldwide. Lockheed can't sell their missile system to China. They just can't. They can't sell the software. They can't sell the guidance system. They can't sell any of that. They're not allowed to. Now, it's technology. It'd be pretty easy to transfer. Is China trying to steal it? Absolutely. And so is Russia, and so is everybody else. But when it comes to other things, when it comes to Chinese drywall, when it comes to steel, when it comes to other stuff, we're at war with certain places. And when you're at war, you have to understand what, and I know people hate the word war, but war is a legitimate term for what we are economically. People aren't dying necessarily, but they could. I mean, if we're not successful in protecting our people and our businesses, and they're not successful in protecting their people and their businesses, their way of life goes away, or our way of life goes away. And that could be, it's what happens in a war. You lose, and you end up with the way of life of whoever wins. Well, frankly, that's what we're talking about here. It's just on the economic side. Nobody's shooting anybody, but it has the same net result, a very, very poor outcome. Okay, and maybe something we don't want. So, but it's very hard because some of these issues are not clear cut. So, when we talk about steel, for example, let's talk about steel. Is steel an industry? Should we be protecting? Should we not put tariffs on steel so that we keep our steel prices low, so that we can buy steel cheaply, which is what we've been doing in the past. We've been buying steel cheaply from China. So we go and buy cheap China steel. Hopefully it will hold up, but we don't know that. We know what happened with drywall, but our businesses, they're in an economic battle with Japan and Germany in terms of building autos. They need steel at the lowest price possible, okay? They need steel at the lowest price possible. And so therefore, they're going to buy China steel. Given no other incentive, they're going to buy China steel. Why wouldn't you? It's cheaper than U.S. steel. Now, over the years, it has been so much cheaper than U.S. steel because it's a subsidized industry. We'll talk why China subsidizes that industry. But it's been a subsidized industry for years through the wage process. So their steel is cheaper, not because they're better manufacturers of steel, but because it's subsidized by the government. The government wants a certain amount of steel produced in China. Why? Because they need it for tanks, and they need it for missiles, and they need it for all those other kinds of things that they need in case they have to wage war. And they're worried about waging war. And so therefore, they're going to make sure that they always have steel. They don't want their steel manufacturers to go out of business. They don't want their steel manufacturers to not exist because they don't want to have to buy. If they're in a war with the United States, a real war, not an economic war, with the United States, they don't really want to be coming to us buying steel. That really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We probably won't sell it to them. In fact, I'm pretty sure the U.S. government would say at that point, you cannot sell steel to China. Just like we say, you cannot sell missiles to China. That's going to happen, all right? And so they have constantly subsidized the industry to the point that a U.S. steel manufacturer cannot make a profit. Not because they're not good, not because our workers aren't good, not because the technology and the productivity is good, not good. It's because our government doesn't subsidize that industry, and therefore the Chinese government does. That subsidy, that price difference, causes resources to flow to the lower price away from the higher price. And at some point in time, our steel manufacturers make a choice. They don't manufacture steel anymore. It's not profitable. You can't do it. You can't make a profit. Nobody will invest in a company that doesn't make a profit. Well, except Facebook. But nobody will invest in a company that doesn't make a profit. So they go ahead and they go out of business, or they change to something else, or they do something else. And now, so what's the effect of that? Well, if we do nothing, we no longer have steel manufacturers. Now, from a defense standpoint, that's probably not a good thing. It is relatively hard to build a destroyer or any kind of tank without steel. It's probably, aluminum maybe, but I don't really want to be an aluminum tank going to war. But it's just, can you do it? Yeah. But and there are other products, granted. But you see what I'm talking about. If we don't have a source for that product and we go to war, we might be able to get that plant up to speed. But what? It takes 4 or 5 years? Nowadays, a war would be over in 4 or 5 years. Maybe back in the 40s, maybe back in the, in the teens, it was possible to ramp up an industry quick enough to start producing things. We did. During the wars, we actually changed technologies. We went from prop planes to jets, all those kind of things. That took a while to do that. And we had people back here. We had the women, Rosie Riveter and all that. They were in, they moved into those jobs because we already had those plants in place. So when we took all the workers away to fight the war, we still had infrastructure in place. All we needed was labor, and we had the labor, and it was pretty quick to get the labor. But what happens when you don't even have the plant? So now we got all the people here that aren't going off to war that want to go work in the plant to produce the stuff for the war, and lo and behold, there's no plant. Now we got to build the plant. So we got to find the location, we got to construct it, got to get some contractors in. Well, they're all off for war. So some tariffs are strategic because they protect things that the U.S. may ultimately need to protect the country. They become a military item. They become something that's part of national defense. That can be technology, that can be certain technologies, or that can be certain materials. We certainly don't want to lose the control of steel. We don't want to lose the control of plutonium and uranium and all of those kind of things. Those are the things that we need to make sure that we protect. So the only way to do that in a free world economy, which is, like I said, not really true because some of those countries are subsidizing, is to strategically use tariffs. Now, you'll hear people say, well, we're going to have a tariff war. We've been fighting a war, and I got to give Trump some credit on this one. He at least knows enough about business to understand that we have been fighting that war for years. We've just been losing because we haven't understood what the opponent was actually doing. Some of these subsidies are not about protecting a certain and providing a benefit to certain industries, but it is about, from a profit standpoint, but it is about making sure that those industries can stay in business. We need to have an agricultural industry. We have to have that in place. That's going to be subsidized if we're going to get in a tariff war, because we're already in a war. Agriculture is one of the items that we have an opportunity to sell to China. It is an item that we sell overseas. We compete against Canada for that, for a lot of that agricultural product. So that product is important. Do we need to protect the family farms? They don't exist, people. They haven't existed for years. There are a few of them. That's a myth. They're corporate farms. Even the family farms are large corporate farms. But and so basically the family farm doesn't exist much anymore. And if they are, they're very, very large. But is it because we need to protect the family farm? No. Is it because we need to protect the corporate farm? No, but we need to be able to produce food. If we can't produce food, again, if we were in a real war where we're shooting at each other, it's pretty hard to last if you don't have any food. And I can tell you, unless we can get food from allies, it may not be, it may not be really very, very successful for us. We might be in a position that we starve to death. In fact, if you want to see that from a historical standpoint, look at the Civil War. One of the reasons the South had such a hard time is they ultimately ran out of food, and they were producing, but they were an agricultural economy, and to some degree, when everybody went off to war, they lost the ability to produce some food, and so many times they didn't have the ability to move the food even to get it to them. So, things like food, steel, vehicles, that's the other thing. Do we need auto manufacturers in the United States? Well, maybe not. Maybe we can just have them in Germany, and maybe we can have them in Japan and Korea, and that's good. But what happens if we have to convert that automobile plant to making tanks or to making something else, right? If it doesn't exist, you aren't going to do that. So you better have at least one of those in the U.S. You better have something like that. But if you don't have some mechanism of protecting those key industries, now nobody likes tariffs if the purpose is to protect an inefficient competitor. But, it's like if my competitor has all kinds of advantages that have been provided to them that I don't have, because my government doesn't do it, then, it's kind of not fair. And I'm going to lose. And so that's not free enterprise. We've talked about that on this show a number of times, that free enterprise is where you've got basically equal competitors on both sides. If I'm a business, even a $1 billion business, if I'm a business and my ultimate consumer on the other side, or my ultimate supplier on the other side, is the Chinese government. Now, it may appear that it's a company, but remember, communism, you do not own the assets. You don't own the plant. That's not yours. You didn't make that. That's the government's. It is theirs. They can take it away at any time. They put people in that they want to give benefits to, who they want to make, who they want to lend favor on, who, they want to be loyal to the Communist Party. There's all of these things that are going on. That has nothing to do with free trade. All right. It has nothing to do with free trade. It has to do with subsidized, and you're competing. So there's no way you're going to get a fair price if I'm a $1 billion corporation on one side and I'm dealing with a $1 trillion economy on the other side. Ain't going to happen. So you have to do something. Our government either has to say, we're good if that country goes away, or that company goes away, or that company has to avoid the Chinese market as a supplier or as a buyer, and they have to find another source for their product. And if they don't, they either have to change the product or they have to get out of business. And we may decide that industry is not one that we need to save. But we need to recognize that when we're doing business when our companies in the U.S. are doing business with other companies in other countries, you have to consider the economic policies of that country that they're in, because it in effect subsidizes the individual corporations. How is that? Well, let's take Ireland. We're at war with Ireland. Nobody really realizes that, but we're at war with Ireland. Why is that? What is Ireland doing that is making them at war with us? Well, Ireland a long time ago decided they want a lot of intellectual property. So intellectual property, which is, the patents and all of the things that are done to provide you or protect you or to solidify a product that you've developed. So let's say I'm Big Pharma and I have produced a cure for cancer, all right? So I go out and get a patent, of course, so that nobody else can have that cure, and so I can make a fortune. So I've got a patent, and that patent is going to allow me to generate a whole lot of money for a long period of time, because I've got this patent issued by the United States or somebody to protect me, okay? Well, China's going to try to steal it because they don't have any protections over there. But assuming I can keep them from stealing it, the only other thing that's going to keep me from making a ton of money is taxes. And so let's say I'm Big Pharma, I developed that in the United States, and I got my patent, and so now I'm going to make billions of dollars a year. Well, on that process, I'm going to pay billions of dollars a year in taxes, because that's what the government's going to do. So what do I do? Well, Ireland comes by and says, hey, you know what? If you move the patent portion of your business, I don't care about your manufacturing plant. I don't care about anything else. Just move the patent, the intellectual property stuff. That's all paper. Doesn't cost you anything. Move it to Ireland. If you move it to Ireland, I won't tax you on it. I won't tax you anything on what you charge for the use of your patent. So what does the company do? I immediately move all my patent items to Ireland, right? I charge a fee to my company in the United States that's actually producing the drug that cures cancer, and I'm charging them a fortune for using that patent. Now that's going from my company in the U.S. to my company in Ireland. So my company in Ireland is producing a tremendous amount of income from charging my company in the U.S. for using that product. In the U.S., that product is a cost, and it causes that U.S. company to have a loss. Do I care? No. I'm a consolidated international company. When I put the two together, I'm still making a ton of money. I'm just not paying as much in taxes. And as we've talked about on the show, taxes are a cost that either gets passed on to the consumer or artificially goes through to the investor. So the investor makes a higher return than they should. So Why does pharma stock sell higher? Because their tax rate's lower, because they push all this patent income off into Ireland. And Ireland says that's great. Why? Ireland gets other fees. It's not nearly what they would get in taxes, but they get other fees, and they get, activity, corporate headquarters, all kinds of things that go in there, which spurs their local economy. So, they get a benefit out of it, but it costs the U.S. a fortune. That's called transfer pricing. The IRS tries to regulate that, but it's hard to regulate that. What is the price that a company would pay for a cure for cancer? What is the price of that? I can tell you, it's going to be whatever we say it is. Because until there is, when the first person comes up with that cure, I can guarantee you most people will pay anything for that. So when the government says, oh, that's a pretty high price for transferring that, allowing this company in the United States and in England or whatever to use this this patent, well, you know what? It is what it is. I can get whatever I want. Nobody else has got one. And by the way, you just gave me a patent so nobody else can have one for 17 years or so. So anyway, that's what we're talking about. That's why, when you look at some of this stuff, we always worry about conflict. Everybody goes ballistic when they talk about North Korea and nuclear war, and Iran and nuclear war, and Russia nuclear war, and China nuclear war. All right, and that's because they can see it. They see missiles being launched and blowing up. They see the potential. They watch military people marching with lockstep and big missiles going behind them. We've all seen that. We can see that. So we can see and we know what the outcome of a war will be. We know and can see when it's going to happen. We can watch a country trying to prepare itself for that kind of war. We can see Iran, for example, trying to get a nuclear missile so that they will then be competitive in a war. We see that. But what we don't see is that Iran is just as aggressive in economic war, funding our competitors, funding other countries, so that they will have access to military technology, so that they will have access to producing a nuclear weapon, so that they will have the resources, the people, and the technology that they need to wage. Because they know that just having a nuclear weapon isn't enough. You have to have some of those other things. So we can kind of understand that. What we have a hard time realizing is that an economic war, losing an economic war, has the same consequences as losing an actual war. And you say, well, that's crazy. But it's not. Think about it. If we had been in war with, if in World War II, we're at war with Germany, and the Germans were able to say, you know what? You just have to do what we do. Whatever we say, you have to do. We're in charge. Only the Aryans are important. You guys have got to do this. Jews aren't important. We're going to kill them. And you got to just implement that and do it that way. Well, we didn't. We fought a war to stop that. We wanted to preserve our way of life. Well, if we lose the economic war and we have no economic resources, we have no jobs, and we have a country in China or North Korea or anybody, Japan or Germany, our country is going to be run like they say. And we have no say in how we're going to do that because we lost. We have no resources to fight the war, the economic war. We can't survive. You think that's not true? Most of us know what brought down Russia had nothing to do with weapons. Yes, we strengthened our military. Why? Because when you start to lose an economic war, countries start waging real war. Because they know the outcome of an economic war, if they lose it, is the same as the outcome of a real war if they lose it. And so if they think that they can protect themselves by military strength and retaliating and that they have the power to win a military war, they will take that avenue. Reagan knew that. He was smart enough to know that. And so he, first of all, built his military so that that wouldn't happen. And then he waged economic war. And economic war brought Russia to his knees. Because once people are not living on a bag of rice and shredded clothes and no heat and no utilities, when they have blue jeans and they have food and they have the ability to buy things that are pleasure items only, that, not just basic survival, they're not going back. They're not changing back at that point. I guarantee you, for example, Cuba is never going back now that it's opened up and has seen what's going on. Because the people there, and I know I was there, the people there have no intention. They embrace free enterprise because they see the outcome. They have no desire to be communist. They have no desire to be fascist. They want free enterprise because they want what we have. They don't want a bag of rice, some beans, a chicken, and that's it for the month. They don't want that. They don't want to drive a car that is from 1959 because they can't fix it. They don't want their buildings falling down. They don't want their housing where you can't have utilities, where the power's out for 12 hours at a time, so that your chicken that you just got can't be refrigerated. So that's what economic war does. We're not, it's funny because Cuba didn't lose an actual war. Probably if they had, they'd be in much better shape now. They did not lose an actual war. They lost an economic war, and they will tell you that. You can go talk to the people down there, and they will tell you that point blank. They lost. Their communism fails. It doesn't work. We can't survive. We need the United States and the free world. That's what they tell you. And because we waged an economic war. Had we held out a little longer, it would be completely over. But I think right now that Cuban government has fallen. They have a new president now that has somewhat embraced some free enterprise. So, that change is already taking place. It probably would have taken place a little faster if we'd have kept those embargoes up a little bit longer. But, that's tough because we are inflicting pain on Cuba, on the people of Cuba, and they've done nothing. But we're at war, and that's what you have to understand. So you can't feel sorry. You can, but it can't change what you got to do. If I feel sorry for the people in China because we're putting tariffs and subsidizing certain things, and maybe that person loses a job and has to go back out into the fields or whatever, then I can feel bad. But if we don't do that, then I will be going back out into the fields, or I will be living on beans and rice, and I will have to worry about what I'm doing for my family and where my family's going to live and how I'm going to support them. Because I'm going to be in a communist government, and I've got to determine. And frankly, I probably don't have any people in the communist government that I'm real close to because I lost. We talk a lot now, thanks to Trump, I guess, a lot about winning and losing. And so it gets thrown around. But the fact of the matter is that in any activity, whether it's business acquisitions, it's sporting events, there really is a winner and a loser. You don't get a trophy for participation. You might, but that trophy gets you nothing. There's winners and there are losers. And with the winners comes the spoils, as they say. And we know that in sports, with winning comes the big trophies and the glory and the exposure to other levels and maybe getting better, going on to college and getting a scholarship. All of those kind of things come with being winners. How many kids that are on a team that loses constantly end up getting scholarships? Not many, because you don't get seen. Nobody goes out to look at the team because there's nobody else there to look at other than maybe you, and they may not know you're there because you've never done anything that they can see. So in economic war, it's the same thing. The people that win, in a merger, I guarantee you that in a merger, the people that get bought out, the firm that gets bought out, they're the ones that lose most of their jobs. You say, and I used to think this when I was younger, well, I know what I'm doing. I mean, I'm really good at what I do. I'm a good CFO. Why would I lose my job when I'm good at it? I think I'm better than somebody that would come in. You know what? That may have been right. What I learned is it probably was right. But if I'm the person coming in and I've got to buy this company and make it work, I've got to produce a profit now that I paid this ridiculously high price for it, I have a CFO already. I may not like the person. I may not know. They may have weaknesses, but they're the devil that I know. They're the weaknesses that I know. Now I got this other person who I think might be better, but I don't know anything about him. And I can't afford to spend 3 years figuring it out in a key position, because by then we could have failed and I lose my job. So in an acquisition, why is it that the people that get acquired tend to lose their jobs? Because they're all incompetent? No. Heck, half the time they're very successful companies that were sold. But the reason is the loyalty lies in the acquirer, not in the acquired. So like first Gulfstream Bank had some great people. They were acquired by CenterState because they had a good footprint. They knew what they were doing. They had good people. John Tranter, Roy Warren, George Haley, all of those people over there at the time, good people, good loan people, knew what they were doing, tapped into the local community, knew how to do professional banking. All right. Now, have they tried to use those people? Yes. But as things are happening, other acquisitions are made, you're appeasing people that you're bringing in from those banks that you paid money for. And so now things start to change. So the acquired person all of a sudden isn't there anymore. Is it because they weren't good? No, they were really good. But it was because all of a sudden there are other people who are currying favor with the shareholders and the board, and we may not be tapped into that. The acquirer is not necessarily tapped into that. They're out. So the same thing happens in an economic situation. In an economic war, I guarantee you that the loser is going to have to deal with the provisions of the country that acquires them. And in that situation, you may not like it. There may be things there that you don't like. Even if that country were, for example, another free enterprise type of country, because, the U.S. is one of the few that's largely pure capitalistic. The other countries are still subsidized to some degree. They have socialized medicine or other things that allow the government to subsidize company benefits so that their companies have an advantage over another country. And so from that standpoint, there's an advantage there. So anyway, it's kind of interesting because we don't think about this tariff thing from a defense standpoint. But trust me, it is all about defense. And that's why there's been retaliation. If there had been no retaliation, you would know that it's not right. That's the thing. The fact that we're implementing these tariffs against some of these countries is legitimate, and the fact that China is trying to punish us in certain areas is also legitimate, and you can see its economic war. Is China going after our steel industry? No. Who are they retaliating against? Retaliating. Ag. Why? Well, is it because ag is that important to China? No, not necessarily. It is important, but they have a large population of farmers. That's, and it's farming by hand. They're not very productive, but they have a large portion of them. So it's not that. It's that farmers are part of Trump's base. And so they know they're waging economic war, and it's war. So what they're trying to do is eliminate their opposition. Their opposition at this point, the way they view it, is Donald Trump. If they can get him out, they win. Same thing with Russia. If they can get him out, they win. That's what it's about. They're just doing it economically. You're not seeing somebody trying to assassinate him, although that's probably taking place. You're seeing somebody coming after somebody and trying to eliminate his ability to get reelected. Is that why every foreign government, especially Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, try to sabotage the U.S. elections? Absolutely. They have been doing it for years. They will continue to do it for years. It's not Russia by itself. It's China. It's North Korea. Why do you think these people employ within their country? Why, if you've got a spam filter, take a look at how much of that stuff's coming out of China and out of North Korea. Why are all of our hackers, our spammers, and all of the people that are trying to steal our identity coming out of there? Because it fosters economic destruction. If you can break down the ability of somebody to have an economic base, a financial base, you eliminate that structure. You eliminate that economy. It has a major effect on that economy.
So anyway, it's an interesting subject, and it is an economic subject. It's important to understand how all these things tie together. And so, we've just touched a little bit on the surface. Hopefully, it was a good discussion this morning for you, and something you can get out of. But we're here every Wednesday, unfortunately for you. So from 9 to 10 o'clock, we're talking about whatever we want. But we'll hope you join us and you can chime in, because it's all about participation right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We are Martin County's Heritage Station.
Are you getting sick, or is it just from using the voice?
No, I'm a little. I got a little bit of I think it's a cold or something, and allergies. So it's one of those kind of things. All right, looks like I better rush to. I got to